This is the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O God.
As soon as Jesus and the disciples left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to Jesus all who were sick and possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, Jesus got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." Jesus answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
My family was in town for Thanksgiving this year, and the day after Thanksgiving, we all went to the zoo. We were especially excited to take my 2-year-old niece, Harpa. She had never been to a zoo before, and she was a little fuzzy on the concept, but she did know that she wanted to see the giraffes. When we got to the zoo, we said, "What should we do first?" And Harpa said, "Giraffe." So the first thing we did was we went to see the giraffes. And we saw them. And they were amazing, as they always are. And Harpa was very impressed. And then, after 5 minutes or so, we said, let's go and see something else. And so we began to walk away from the giraffe exhibit. And Harpa cried, like screaming, meltdown, limp noodle, grasping in the air, "No!" Like I said, she's 2 years old, and she wanted to see the giraffes, and she didn't want to stop seeing the giraffes. She didn't know that we were going to give her more animals to see. All she understood was that we were leaving and taking the giraffes away from her. No! Well, eventually we figured out that what we needed to do was we needed to announce what the next animal we were going to see was before we left any exhibit. And that helped a little bit, although she still cried when we left the elephants and the meerkats and on and on. I don't fault Harpa very much, because I think that there's a little bit of that 2-year-old in all of us, isn't there? I mean, when it comes to giving up familiar things, or moving on to new things, or not getting exactly what we want or expect, aren't we all toddlers at heart? When challenged with a new idea, don't we want to dig in our heels a bit? When we don't like the changes around us, aren't we likely to complain about it? In our workplaces, our schools, our neighborhoods, how often do we say, "I don't want to do something different. I want to stay with what I know"? Here's the thing. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus didn't stay. He moved on to the next thing he was supposed to do. I think that's one way to hear the story from Mark's gospel, at least. It tells the way Jesus went on to the next step of his journey in ministry. Now, it's a busy story with lots going on, sickness and healings and crowds, but I want to focus on this part of the story toward the end of the reading, where after a productive day of ministry, Jesus had gone away by himself to pray. The disciples found him there, and they told him everyone was looking for him. And then Jesus said, "Let us go to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do." So think about what this was like for Jesus. He was experiencing some real success in ministry at this point. Crowds were flocking to him. He was curing and casting out. Word about him had spread so much there was a line out the door. And in response, Jesus said, "Let's go somewhere else. That's what I need to do." Don't you wonder if the disciples were like, "No! You've got a good thing going here, Jesus. Stay where you are. Why leave?" But Jesus moves on. And why? Well, because that's what he's supposed to do. Because that's what he was sent by God to do, to go elsewhere, to go everywhere. "Let us go," Jesus says, "so that I may proclaim the message there also." Jesus was on a journey, on a mission, and it wasn't to stay in one place and only be among the people there. It was to keep walking, to bring the good news of God's kingdom to all. It was to keep moving, not to reap success, but to be faithful. It was to keep going all the way to the cross. Last weekend, we used this passage from Mark for some devotional time during our church council retreat. I had hoped that it would help us to think about the value of taking time away, like Jesus did to pray, like we were doing to retreat. But it was one of our council members, Gragg, who helped me see that after Jesus prayed, he wasn't just refocusing on a new thing, but that he was also leaving what he had been doing behind. He was leaving what he had been doing behind. I mean, Jesus could have stayed there and kept doing the healings and getting the crowds, but instead he brought that chapter to a close so a new one could begin. We talked as leaders about that a lot at our council retreat. We talked about how we as a church can't just keep doing the same thing. The world is changing. Life is different. People are asking different questions and facing different realities than before. As a church, we know that God is calling us not to stay where we are, but to move into a new direction. A new direction that may be faithful. No, I like the giraffes. That's what we might be tempted to say, isn't it? But we are empowered by Jesus to follow his example of going to the place, the new places, the unknown places, so that we can proclaim the message there also. And that goes for each and every one of us who seek to follow Jesus. The Christian life, after all, is not about arriving, but about the journey. We are not to arrive and then stop and stay at one place in faith, but we are beckoned by God to journey forward, still changing, always growing. The German priest Martin Luther said it this way 500 years ago. "This life, therefore, is not righteousness, but growth in righteousness. Not health, but healing. not being but becoming, not rest but exercise. We are not yet what we shall be, but we are growing toward it. The process is not yet finished, but it is going on. This is not the end, but it is the road. A few years ago, I was talking with a pastor who asked me this question: Nathan, what is the next step in your spiritual journey? What is the next step in your spiritual journey? And that question really challenged me, because it reminded me indeed that my faith wasn't supposed to be standing still. So today, let me ask you this same challenging question. What is the next step in your spiritual journey? What is the next step? Where is God inviting you to go next in this Christian life? Are you willing to answer that question and live it also? Staying where we are is comfortable. It's familiar. We know the territory. We know the rules. We've got the giraffes. But we are called to follow a Lord who doesn't stay, but goes. Goes to the neighboring towns, goes to the neighbors next door, goes to the sick and the sad, to the criminals and the crucifiers, and says to his disciples, says to you and me, you come this way also. Whatever that way will be for you this week, this year, this lifetime, know that Jesus is going to be with you as you go. So, let us go. Amen.